He had everything the world values: wealth, land stretching to the horizon, purebred horses, gleaming pickup trucks, and a surname feared throughout the region. Ethan Granger was a modern cowboy, a king of the West, surrounded by luxury and silence. But even the most powerful men carry ghosts that money cannot silence. One seemingly ordinary morning, he disappeared without a trace. Days later, he was found bloody, dying, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Who saved him? A woman forgotten by the world, a widow, a mother, and as wounded by life as he was. What she didn't know, as she dragged him into her home, was that this simple act of kindness would place her at the center of a much larger story. A story of redemption, secrets, and improbable love. Prepare yourself. This is the journey of a man who lost everything, only to discover he never had what truly mattered. The sky was too clear for a day of tragedy. Over the vastness of the Texan desert, sunlight spread like golden blades over the rocks and dust. Heat danced on the asphalt, distorting shapes in the distance. In that solitary immensity, any sign of life seemed a miracle. And it was precisely there, at the most forgotten point of the old Cattle Ridge Road, that Ethan Granger's destiny was rewritten. He was driving alone, no bodyguards, no companions. Just him, the steering wheel, and a head full of thoughts that roared louder than any engine. The night before, a letter arrived without warning. Yellowed paper, unknown handwriting, and words sharp as a knife. I know what you did in 1999. Blood doesn't wash away with dollars. No sender, no signature. But with a promise, you will pay. Ethan was not a man of fear. He had faced treacherous investors, land syndicates, even gangs. But this was personal. It was old. It was true. And it made him leave before dawn, as if fleeing into the desert could silence the past. The attack was swift, almost professional. A dark pickup truck appeared in his rearview mirror and stuck close. Ethan accelerated. In seconds, he heard gunshots. The first shattered the rear window. The second hit his shoulder, blood gushing onto the steering wheel. The third pierced his belly, and he lost control. The car skidded, spun on the gravel, and flipped twice before landing upside down in a dry ditch. The mysterious truck vanished like smoke. Silence. Hours passed. Blood slowly trickled down the side of his face. The pain throbbed like a burning hammer. Ethan tried to keep his eyes open, but the images of the blue sky dissolved into blurs. In his mind, he saw flashes of his ranch, of a woman he never forgot, and of a decision made years ago, a decision that might finally be collecting its price. It was then that she appeared. Nora Callahan was driving her old Jeep, returning from the town's general store with a few bags of flour, a bottle of milk, and 2 pairs of mended boots. A mother of 2 small children, widowed at 34, she had learned to live with silence and pain. She lived in a small wooden house at the foot of a dry hill, surrounded by chickens, wind, and longing. When she saw something shining on the roadside, she thought it was a piece of metal. But as she got closer, she braked sharply. It was a man. A body. Bleeding. Unconscious. She ran to him without hesitation. Her instinct was stronger than fear. She saw the wounds, felt his weak breath, and realized he was still alive barely. Nora knew the danger. She knew she could get involved in something she didn't understand. But she also knew that if it were her husband lying there, someone would have to help him. So, with great effort, she dragged him to the Jeep and took him to her house. The road there was narrow, and the path seemed longer with the weight of a nearly dead stranger in the back seat. Nora spoke to him in a low voice, as if her calm could keep him awake. "You're going to make it, understand?" "I don't let anyone die on my land." He didn't respond. The house was modest, with old wooden walls and windows with handmade floral curtains. The smell of stale bread still lingered in the air. Nora's children, Tommy and Lily, were playing in the yard when she arrived, shouting for help. The children helped as they could, and soon Ethan was placed on an improvised bed in the living room. Nora cleaned his wounds, extracted the bullet from his shoulder with a rusty pair of tweezers, stitched the flesh with steady hands that had stitched worse wounds, but in the heart. During the night, Ethan delirious. He called out names Nora didn't understand. He mumbled things about forgiveness, betrayal, and she never forgive me. Nora had no idea who he was. Not yet. To her, he was just a broken man, like so many others who had passed through her life and left. When the sun rose again, he opened his eyes. The ceiling was low, the room warm, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Beside the bed, Nora watched him with a cup in her hands and a sober expression. "You're alive," she said, "and you owe it to chance, or to God, depending on what you believe." Ethan tried to speak, but everything hurt. His body, his throat, his soul. He observed the surroundings. Simple, welcoming, different from anything he knew. For the first time in years, he felt someone looked at him without fear, without interest, without wanting anything from him. He mumbled a faint, "Thank you." Nora just nodded. She still had no idea who he was, but she would soon find out. And upon discovering, she would have to decide whether to keep him alive or hand him over to the past he was trying to escape. Time seemed to move slower in Nora's house. The minutes didn't follow the hands of the old clock on the wall, but rather the rhythm of Ethan's weak breaths, the children's light footsteps, and the wind that knocked on the windows as if trying to remind everyone that the world outside kept turning. For Nora, the days since the rescue passed in a blur divided between caring for the wounded stranger, keeping her children fed, and containing the doubts that began to weigh on her shoulders. Ethan could barely lift his head, but his eyes observed everything carefully. That simple, honest house disconcerted him more than any luxury hospital he had ever been in. Everything there had been earned through effort. Nora's hands were calloused not by choice, but by necessity. He noticed this in the way she changed the bandages firm, without hesitation, like someone who had stitched her own pain more than once. On the third day, Ethan finally had the strength to ask where he was. His voice was still hoarse, and the cut on his lip made every word more difficult. Nora answered bluntly, "You're in my house, about 30 miles from Cattle Ridge, and, if you want to know, you're only alive because I decided to stop on that road." He tried to smile, but the gesture turned into a grimace of pain. "Thank you, for what you did. I don't even know your name." "Nora," she replied dryly, as if unwilling to say more. And she didn't. Nora Callahan had her reasons for not trusting easily. Since her husband, Caleb, died in a rodeo accident, life had become a daily battle. She lost the small ranch they had, their savings evaporated, and all that remained was the small house where they now lived and the debts that grew like weeds. Temporary jobs, sewing for neighbors, cakes sold at the fair. Every penny was counted. And yet, she had stopped on that road to save a stranger. Because, deep down, even with a hardened heart, Nora still believed that life needed some meaning, and perhaps that man was an answer or a question. On the fourth day, Tommy, Nora's oldest son, ran into the living room, eyes wide and out of breath. "Mom, there are 2 men on the road, walking slowly. They're asking about a flipped car." Ethan tried to get up, in despair. The pain made him groan loudly, but he gripped the arm of the chair and murmured, "They came back. They came to finish what they started." Nora turned to him, alarmed. "Who are they? Who's after you?" Ethan hesitated. His gaze wandered to the wall, as if searching for an answer that wouldn't condemn him entirely. "I don't know exactly, but they want me dead, and they have good reasons for it. So you did something." Silence confirmed it. Nora walked to the door, locked all the windows, and told the children to stay in the back of the house. She returned to the living room and, with surprising firmness, handed Ethan an old but functional shotgun. "You have one chance, but if you bring danger to my house, I'll finish what they started myself." The threat didn't sound like bravado. There was sincerity in her coldness, and that made Ethan realize that this woman was not fragile. She was steel molded by loss. That night, neither of the men appeared, but fear settled inside the house like a shadow that refused to leave. Nora didn't sleep. Neither did Ethan. Both kept watch, she for the safety of her children, he for a peace he might never find again. The next day, Nora decided to go to town alone. She needed to buy antibiotics. She told the children not to talk to anyone, to keep the doors locked, and that Ethan shouldn't leave the room. But the unexpected happened. Lily, the youngest daughter, found a leather wallet in Ethan's backpack. Curious, she opened it. Inside, she saw golden cards, an old photo of a huge ranch ... and an ID, Ethan Charles Granger. The name echoed in the girl's mind. She had heard that name before in a conversation her mother had with a rancher in town, full of resentment. When Nora returned, Lily ran to her and showed her the document. "He's an important man, isn't he? He has money." Nora's face paled. She took the ID with trembling hands. She read the name. She looked at the room, and her stomach churned. Ethan Granger. The same name that appeared on the deeds of the ranch that had swallowed dozens of small properties in the last 20 years. The same man who, according to rumors, had dealt the final blow to her husband's dream buying, through third parties, the debt that made them lose the ranch. And now he was in her house. Alive because of her. Nora's head spun. Every gentle gesture, every weak sigh from him, now seemed part of a cruel charade. But there was something in Ethan's eyes that made her doubt. He wasn't the same man people described. He was broken, vulnerable ... human. Still, something was wrong. Very wrong. She returned to the living room, where Ethan now watched her with unease. "You lied," she said. "You knew I had no idea who you were, and yet you stayed here, silent." Ethan took a deep, difficult breath. "I thought ... if I told you, you wouldn't help me. And you were right. I did horrible things. I hurt people. I bought land, took families ... maybe even yours. But ... it was you. Caleb's ranch. You ruined us." Ethan closed his eyes. Guilt, finally, found its voice. Nora stepped back. "I saved you, but now I don't know why anymore." And at that moment, doubt and resentment settled in. The connection that was forming there was threatened. And the ghosts Ethan tried to bury were, one by one, opening their eyes. But the worst was yet to come. The atmosphere inside the house had changed. The same place that in the first few days had been a refuge now felt cramped, suffocating. The air was heavy with unanswered questions, avoided glances, and grievances that had never been spoken aloud until now. Nora barely spoke to Ethan. She served coffee in silence, changed his bandages coldly, and avoided any touch, any gesture that could be interpreted as compassion. Ethan felt the weight of the truth. He knew he had stepped on sacred ground by entering that house. This woman had saved him without knowing she had given shelter to the man responsible for her ruin. He wanted to explain himself. But what words would be enough to justify years of decisions made out of ambition? What phrase would cleanse the pain of a woman who lost everything because of his greed? That afternoon, Nora left without warning. She left the children with a distant neighbor and took her jeep towards town. She needed answers. And she went straight to the only person who still dared to speak to her without lies. Old Sheriff Donnelly, a man with tired eyes, a hoarse voice, and a sharp memory. "Sheriff ... tell me the truth. His name is Ethan Granger. He's alive. He's in my house. Was he the one who ruined Caleb's ranch?" Donnelly, who had always held a silent respect for Nora, took off his hat and nodded sadly. "Yes, ma'am. It was him." but not in the way people say. Your ranch was bought by a straw man. Yes, but the orders came from him. Only ... There's something no one knows. Nora narrowed her eyes, trying to contain the rage bubbling in her chest. What? The sheriff took a deep breath before continuing. Caleb was involved in a complicated scheme. Debts with suppliers, a loan he should never have signed. He forged documents. Ethan found out. He could have turned him in and destroyed his reputation, but he preferred another way out. He bought the debt, took over the ranch. In exchange, ... silence. The revelation struck Nora's heart like lightning. The man she hated had spared her husband's image, protected his name, and yet taken everything. She returned home in silence, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The image of Caleb, perfect, hardworking, and honest, began to unravel at the edges. And within her, a new feeling mixed with anger, confusion. When she arrived, she found Ethan standing in the living room, leaning with effort on an improvised cane. He looked at her as if preparing for a life's verdict. You know now, he said, his voice firmer than she expected. She just nodded. Why didn't you tell me before? She asked, not hiding the bitterness. Because I never thought I deserved forgiveness. And maybe I still don't. Nora sighed and sat at the table. For the first time since the revelation, she looked at him without repulsion, but also without pity. You destroyed my life. But you saved my husband from shame. And then you survived, perhaps for what? To apologize? To pay some debt to God? Ethan looked out the window, his eyes lost in the orange horizon. Perhaps. Or perhaps because, for the first time, I'm starting to understand what it means to truly lose something. Silence fell between them, but it was different from that of the previous days. It was no longer a barrier, but a minefield about to reveal its secrets. That night, a different sound echoed from outside. Tires. Slowly. The crunch of gravel under heavy wheels. Nora peered through the curtain crack. A black pickup truck. The same men. They had returned. They're here, she said, chilling inside. Ethan got up as best he could. He knew the moment had come. Those men weren't after money. They were after revenge. Lock the doors. Get the children out the back. Go to the woods. Now, he said urgently. And you. I'm going to finish what I started 20 years ago. But Nora didn't move. If you die here, everything you've lived won't mean anything. The pain, the regret, the chance to make things right, it all goes away. I didn't save you to see you die today. Ethan looked at her with tear-filled eyes. For the first time, someone cared. Someone saw him not as the arrogant magnate, but as the flawed, regretful man he had become. The attackers' footsteps approached. Two of them got out, armed. Nora picked up the shotgun. Ethan, with difficulty, walked to the door. But before he could open it, something happened. A third man got out of the truck, older, dark suit, a face too familiar to be forgotten. It was Raymond Keller, Ethan's former partner. The same one he had betrayed years ago by buying his share of the company with hidden clauses. Hello, Ethan, Keller said, with a poisonous smile. Ready to pay what you owe me? Nora froze. This wasn't just revenge for business. It was personal, deep, and old. You're making a mistake, Keller, Ethan said. I came here to start over, to fix what I destroyed. Too late now. This is your end. But please, enjoy your last few minutes ... with your new family. And then Keller made a sign. 2 shots rang out. But they didn't come from the house. They came from the hill. Someone was watching. And everything would change once again. Night descended heavily upon Nora's farm, enveloping everything in deep shadows. The silence, once tranquility, was now a grim premonition, like the held breath before a storm. Ethan knew this would be the last time he walked those fields as a free man, that the choices he made in the coming hours would echo forever. A few miles away, Raymond Keller and his men prepared for the final assault. Keller, with his cold, calculating gaze, saw Ethan not just as an enemy, but as a personal debt to be collected, a ghost that needed to be eliminated to secure his empire of corruption and fear. He was willing to do anything without mercy. Inside the house, Nora organized the children, making them understand the gravity of the situation, though she tried to hide her fear behind firm words. The bond between her and Ethan had strengthened in recent days, but there was still an invisible wall between them, built by the losses and betrayals of the past. Ethan, leaning on his cane, walked through the yard, looking at the starry sky, trying to gather strength. He knew he couldn't run anymore, that he needed to face his demons, and that perhaps, in doing so, he would find a new reason to live. As the shadows approached, Keller ordered his men to advance in silence, almost like specters from the past coming to collect unpaid debts. The first impact was brutal. Shots cut through the air, breaking the silence with violence. Nora held the shotgun, protecting her children, while Ethan, though wounded and tired, struggled to stand firm. In the midst of the shootout, Ethan recognized one of the men. It was Tommy, one of Keller's henchmen whom he had defeated years ago in a dirty deal. The rage he felt was almost paralyzing, but he needed to stay focused. Every bullet fired was a sentence of life or death. Then, an unexpected bang changed the course of the battle. Jacob, with a group of allies, arrived at the scene, armed and ready to fight. The fight became hand-to-hand, tactic against tactic, amidst the chaos of voices, shots, and screams. During the confrontation, Ethan and Keller met face to face. Keller smiled, as if savoring victory, and said, "Do you think you can fix the past? That this farm, this woman, your children, can erase what you did?" Ethan, with steady eyes, replied, "I can't erase it, but I can choose who I will be from now on." The fight was intense, full of blows and words sharp as knives. The moment Keller tried to draw a weapon for a fatal shot, Ethan, using his last strength, disarmed him. In the fall, Keller hit his head on a rock and passed out. Keller's men, seeing their leader fallen and Jacob's reinforcements growing, began to retreat. The siege was broken. With dawn, the house was silent, except for the soft sounds of the children who were already sleeping again, oblivious to the war that had occurred. Ethan sat on the porch, looking at the horizon, exhausted but at peace. Nora approached, bringing a hot cup of coffee. She sat beside him, wordless, but with a look that said everything: forgiveness, hope, and a new beginning. Ethan, for the first time in a long time, felt that there was something greater than money or power. He felt that redemption was not a distant place, but an arduous path he had chosen to walk. The battle was over. The future was still uncertain, but it was open. And that small farm in the desert would from then on be the symbol of the life that could be reborn from the ashes. The sun rose timidly over the farm, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold, as if promising a new beginning. Nora's house, which had so often seen internal and external storms, was now enveloped in a rare, almost sacred calm. The struggle, the fears, and the pains of the past week left deep scars, but also opened space for something new: hope. Ethan watched the horizon, his eyes still marked by exhaustion, but shining with a silent determination. He was no longer the relentless, distant man who had arrived at that house wounded and suspicious. Now, he carried the weight of regret, yes, but also the sincere desire to rebuild what he had destroyed, to be better for those who, against all odds, accepted him. Nora passed by him, carrying a basket with fresh bread and fruits picked from the orchard that against time tried to bloom again. She stopped, looked at Ethan, and smiled softly, an expression full of meaning. "You know," she said, "life can be cruel, but it also has a strange way of giving us a second chance. It's not fair, nor easy, but it's real. Ethan nodded, feeling the words echo within him. For years, he had sought meaning in possessions, power, and status. Now, he realized that true value lay in connections, in the people who stay when all that's left is truth. Nora's children, Tommy and Lily, played in the yard, their laughter filling the air like music, a sound that seemed more precious than any fortune. Ethan watched, imagining the future he could build for them, for Nora, for himself. But the past had not yet been completely buried. The authorities arrived at the farm a few days later, summoned by Jacob and his friends to formalize the arrest of Keller and his henchmen. Ethan cooperated with the investigations, willing to face the consequences of his actions, because he knew that true redemption would only come with the truth. Nora stood by him throughout the process, not as a wife or friend, but as someone who understood the complexity of a man marked by guilt, but also by the courage to change. And this understanding gradually transformed into respect, into trust feelings they both carefully guarded. Months passed. The farm began to prosper again, not by the force of money, but by joint effort, by the love that grew in every simple gesture. Ethan learned to plant, to care for the land, to be part of something greater than himself. On a golden evening, sitting together on the porch, Nora looked at Ethan and said, "We can't erase the past, but we can choose who we want to be from now on." Ethan smiled, gently took her hand, and replied, "With you. I learned that true wealth is made of forgiveness, hope, and courage." They didn't know what the future held, but they had something many sought in vain, the chance to start over. And, on that small desert farm, two hearts marked by pain found peace, not the peace of the absence of problems, but the peace of fighting together to build a different tomorrow. Because, in the end, everyone deserves to be saved. Even rich cowboys, even lonely widows, even stories that seem condemned to silence. And that was the true legacy that this improbable encounter would leave forever.